how to select areas is pretty important. When you make a selection in Photoshop Elements 12, you're telling the program what part of the image you actually want to edit. And you can select the entire image, or you can select a smaller area just by using the Marquee tool to drag a box, using the Lasso tool to make a lasso selection, or using the Quick Select to make a quick selection. And in this lesson, we're going to go over how you can do that and why it's important. First up, let's talk about the Marquee tools. And now your Marquee tools are going to be located right here. And if you see this little area right in the top corner, that tells you that you have more than one available. And if you go ahead and click on that, you're going to see that in your options panel, you do have more than one available. You have your square or rectangle Marquee tool, and you have your elliptical or round Marquee tool. Now when you use the rectangle Marquee, what you're doing is you're making selections basically in a rectangle. And it's great to use when you want to select an entire image. And how you do that is you go up to, say, right outside the top corner of your image, and you're going to click and drag to the other corner of the image and then release once you have it all selected. And now you can see through these marching ants or the dotted line that's moving that your entire image is selected. Now we just use the rectangle Marquee on its basic default selection options, but there are some different options that you can use with this Marquee, and you see them right through here. First, you have what kind of selection you want. We're using a new selection, but you can also use an add to selection, a subtract from selection, or an intersect with selection. First, let's go to the subtract from selection. Right now we have the entire image selected, but if we have subtract from selection and you go in here and once again you click and then you drag, you're going to see that this area that we're dragging is now deleted from our selection. That corner is gone, and that's subtract from selection. Well, maybe we don't like that. You want to do an add to selection. You can come back in here, drag back up to the corner, and now you have that area reselected. Finally, you have this intersect with selection. With intersect, you're going to select only the parts where your new selection and the old selection that's already been selected are intersecting with each other. Just go ahead and click and drag, and now you can see this area where the new selection intersected with the old selection is the only part of the image that you selected. So that's 4 different ways that you can select using the rectangular Marquee tool. Let's go back to new selection. And here you have your feather, and what the feather does is it softens the edges of a selection. And why you use feather is because when you select something without a feather that's a square, if you put an effect on this and you just do it in this area, as you can see, it gives you this really hard line and the effect isn't blended very well. But if you get out of that and you go to feather, and you go to probably something around 10 or 12, right in that range, and you get a softer selection, it's going to blend a little bit better with the rest of the photo. When you're working with different kinds of selection that maybe aren't based on geometry, the feathering is going to be very important. So just keep the feathering in mind, that it gives you a softer look to your selection and makes the blending a little nicer. Now, although we've been working with the rectangular Marquee, the elliptical Marquee works exactly the same way. The only difference is that you get a round selection instead of a square one. You have the same options with one difference, which is with the elliptical Marquee, you have the ability to use anti-aliasing, whereas in the rectangle, you can't do that. Now, other than feather, the only other things you may need to know is the aspect. When you select an aspect, you can go to a fixed ratio or a fixed size. Now, if you do this, this is what you use if you want to specify your selection. If you go to a fixed ratio of 1:1, then when you pull out your rectangular Marquee, it's going to control your selection so that instead of getting a wacky rectangle, you're going to get it in a fixed ratio of height to width of 1:1. If you do it as a fixed size, you can actually decide how big you want the box just by typing it in, and then you don't have to drag and pull. And the last thing you have in your options panel is refining the edge. And when you go into Refine Edge dialog box, you'll see all of this white appear. Well, you didn't lose the rest of your photo. This is just showing you your selection and what it actually looks like without the distraction of the background. And when you do this, you can actually make some changes to the radius. So it just gives you a little bit better control over how you use your selection. Let's go ahead and cancel out of that. Now that you have a selection, the question is, what are you going to do with it? Obviously, you can apply effects. You can also do some interesting things with painting. For instance, if you use your paintbrush now and you go and you paint in here, as you can see, I'm painting and it's coloring inside the selection box, but outside the selection box over here, nothing's happening. So something that you should know with selections is when you're using a tool, it's only going to affect what's inside the selection box. Let's go ahead and Control Z out of that. Now right here you have the gradient tool. Let's go ahead and pull this across the picture and you'll see that it only affects inside the selection box. So that's one of the things that you do with the selection. The other thing that happens with the selection is that when you use a selection, you can hit Control X, and that's cut. And you've now just cut out this area of the image from your image. You can also go ahead and hit Control V, and that's paste. So you can paste your selection, and it happens on a new layer by using your selection tool. So when you use a selection tool, you can actually cut and paste onto a different layer because you're using selections. So that's one of the things that you use selections for. If you ever want to select the entire photo and you don't want to drag the rectangular marquee, just go up to Select and go to All or Control A, and that will select the entire image for you. Now, while the marquee selections are great for making quick and easy selections, they are not the most accurate selections to make. If you want really a detailed selection that only selects a certain color or a certain shape, like this flower shape, the marquee tools are really going to make it difficult for you, which is why it's great that there's other selection tools. And one of those other selection tools is the Lasso Tool. And the Lasso Tool is right here, and you can either click on it or hit L to bring up your Lasso Tool. And once again, you have your options panel, which gives you 3 different kinds of lassos. You have the regular lasso tool, you have the magnetic lasso tool, and then you have this polygon lasso tool. And within the lasso tool selections, you once again have your 4 different kinds of selecting. And then you have your anti-aliasing and your feathering and your refine edges. All of these options work the same way that they did in the marquee tool. And what you do with the lasso is you can click, hold it down, and drag, and it allows you to make freehand selections. And you go ahead and you draw around, and then you come back to the first place that you drew, and then let go. And as you can see, you've made this freehand selection. And that allows you to get a more detailed selection that only applies maybe to a specific, on this case, flower. That's how the lasso tool works. And as you can see by zooming in, my selection is pretty decent, but it's not perfect. Down here at the bottom, I got some green in there, and actually I'm way off all the way around there. Well, to get a better selection, you can go back to the lasso tool. You can either click here or go ahead and take L, and you can go to the magnetic lasso tool. So go ahead and deselect. And the magnetic lasso tool actually works exactly like the lasso tool with a little bit of a difference where you click and you hold down, and now the computer is going to go and it's automatically going to grab an edge for you. And the edge will be anywhere where it sees a color variant. Whoops. And then even if your hand slides, it's going to try to magnetically stick to that edge line. So this is going to give you a lot cleaner of a selection by using the magnetic lasso tool. You just keep going all the way around until you get to the beginning, double click, and there you have your flower selected. And it's not completely perfect, but it looks pretty good. Now finally you have this polygonal lasso tool. You go ahead and click that. And the difference with this one here is you're actually going to go in and you're going to draw in a connect the dots fashion. Now that you have your tool selected, go ahead and hit click. And then instead of holding down and dragging, you're going to just pull forward without the mouse being depressed. And when you pull forward, you're going to see that you have this little line following you there. And that's your selection line. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to draw a line, then you're going to click, and now you'll be able to pull again. And so now you can go in a clock 360 around fashion and make your next line, make your next line, and you just continue clicking all the way around the flower. And I'm not a big fan of this tool because it gives you these really straight lines and that's not very organic. And although there's times where it will work for you, generally speaking, a lot of the times when you're trying to select something, it's going to have a rounder body to it, so using this polygon doesn't work very well. But that's another way that you can use the lasso tool. Elements gives you a couple of other ways that you can do some quick selecting, and that's with the quick selection tool right here next to the lasso tool in your toolbar, or you can hit A and you go ahead and select it, and then you come down here to your options panel and you'll see that you'll have a couple of different tools available to you in this options panel, and that's the quick selection tool, the selection brush tool, and the magic wand tool. Let's start out with the magic wand tool. Now the magic wand tool comes in here, and what it does is when you click a pixel, it's going to select colors of a similar color value. So if you go ahead and click that, as you can see, anything with a similar bluish color, it just goes ahead and automatically selects for you. Now obviously it didn't select any blue over here. That's because it's any blue that's touching. So it gives you an area of all the blue with a similar shade right there. And then you can go in here and you can maybe do like a color replacement. Go into your color replacement brush and put that in. And it gives you a nice organic looking paint job. So that's an interesting way to make a selection. And with the magic wand, the main thing to know is that you can adjust your tolerance. And if you have a low tolerance, it's only going to select a small area and just give you the blues that are absolutely the closest to the one that you hovered over. Now, if you have a higher tolerance, it's going to give you a much larger selection and a larger range of blue. As you can see, it's selected all of that flower almost right there. So playing with your tolerance is really a big deal when you're playing with the magic wand tool. Now we're going to talk about the quick selection tool. The quick selection tool is a really great tool because it makes selecting an area fast and easy. Now to use a quick selection tool, you just go in and you select your area and just pull. And you see it grabs large areas at a time. Now the only thing tricky about it is, as you can see, when I was grabbing this flower, it went ahead and grabbed this green area right here. Although that looks green and that one's blue, you'll see they're both pretty light and they're very similar in values. So the quick selection, when the computer's deciding what area is one area, thought that that was a similar area. So how do you get rid of that? Come down here and make your selection to subtract to selection, go back in here and click that. And it's going to start to take away from the green. And then you can see you now have a quick selection of your flower. And that's your quick selection tool. And finally we have this quick selection brush. And in the selection brush you have two options. You can add and you can subtract. And then you can decide whether you want to make a selection or a mask. A selection is where you're just making a basic selection. And a mask is used for masking off areas within a photo, and we're not going to go over that right now. And then here you have your basic brush that you get to pick and your size and your hardness, all things that you've seen before. So you're going to go ahead and select your options, and then you're going to come up here. And just like the magic wand tool or the quick selection, you're going to go over an area you want to select, and you're going to click it. And then you're going to brush on by clicking and dragging the area that you want to select. And it's going to give you a fairly smooth line because you're basically just painting your selection on. Once you have that done, then you can go in and you can grab a paintbrush You can come in here and just start replacing the color, and it will only go to the areas that you've selected. And that's just one of the things that you can do using this selection brush.